Thanks so much for sticking around to the end of this podcast. I will try to do another one soon, although with the holiday season coming up, I can't make any guarantees. In that spirit, since I don't know what I'll be doing between now and Christmas and Hanukkah and Kwanzaa, I guess, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, and if I'm not back until January, Happy New Year. I am incredibly optimistic about the coming year, and that's despite the turmoil in the world. For someone like Trump, who functions well in chaos, this turmoil may be the perfect thing for him to clear the way for a new American, well, maybe not an American century, but certainly an American decade, and a great time for the world as a whole. I'm going to start here with something that's very provocative, and that is that it's a great thing that Donald Trump lost in 2020. I know that sounds insane because the last 4 years have been awful, but it's that very awfulness that was necessary. Trump would have been a lame duck president. He would have been endlessly attacked. He would have struggled with the deep state, which would have been just sort of a boiling irritation that, well, greater than irritation, but that hadn't erupted into an obvious pustule that all could see was a problem. He would have been a joke to world leaders who would have worked with him reluctantly and poked fun at him. He would have been eaten away from inside his administration, and the Democrats would consistently portray themselves as the white knights waiting to save America from the abnormality that was the Trump administration. What happened instead was that Biden won, and it revealed a bunch of things that needed to be seen in order for the system to change. The fact is that a political system, just like a human body, can bumble along in failing health for a very long time. There often needs to be a crisis, whether of a person's health or a nation's health, before people realize there really is a problem and that it's not just malcontents or crazy-eyed prophets who have pointed out the problem, but something needs to be addressed. At this point, one of two things can happen. Things can implode so quickly that there's no saving the situation, or people can react and things can get better. I am hoping that we still have time for things to get better, although Joe Biden, in the waning days of his time in office, is doing everything he can to make sure things don't get better. But if things can hold out another 45 days or so, the world is about to be transformed in a wonderful way because Trump will have a power and moral and political authority he never would have had Biden's presidency not exposed the rot. Within America, Biden's presidency exposed the rot in the Democrat Party, mostly through the whole transgender thing. The transgender thing reached its apex under Biden because Biden embraced it. He shoved it into the military. He shoved it into education and this wasn't necessarily Biden. This was Gorsuch with the Bostock decision, but that shoved it into our entire labor system. And because that was the one that says that under the 1964 Civil Rights Act, so-called transgenderism, you all know I think it's an absolute fake, that it is either a tragic mental illness or the sick mental illness of sexual perverts. But either way, it's a mental illness. Bostock said that transgenderism is covered by the Civil Rights Act under the term sex, which in 1964 was obviously and only intended to refer to the male-female binary. So Americans got a look at the incredible rot of Democrat ideology through the prism of transgenderism. They also got a look at what happens when you have an administration that is obsessed with foisting racial divisions on America. They got a look at the immigration policies, which had nothing to do ever with humanitarian ideas, but were always meant to flood America with a cohort of people who the radicals hoped would break the system entirely, paving the way for communism, and the cynical hoped would transform the population, paving the way for permanent Democrat power. They saw the Democrats lust after packing the Supreme Court, adding new states, breaking the filibuster. They finally saw the Democrat Party fully exposed because with Biden's ascension, which is actually Obama's third term, the Democrats thought they had the wind at their back and could let their freak colors fly. And they really didn't expect that when Americans saw the full freak, the open borders, the destruction of the military, the attacks on their children's physical integrity, they never expected that people would recoil in horror. So, knowing that, this is why Trump going into office in his second term, he's unencumbered by his first term, as he would have been had he just had a continuation of his first term. He would have been encumbered by the same turncoats and quislings and Vichy Republicans and traitors within his own camp. He's coming in clean slate, bringing in people like Kash Patel, bringing in people like Pete Hegseth, and the American people approve of these choices because they recognize that this is like Hercules and the Aegean stables. They are piled so high with government deep state fecal matter that you need to take a whole river and push it through these stables to clean it out. He would not have been able to do that during his first term. I think he can and will do it after this dreadful Biden interregnum. The other thing is that overseas, America and the whole world have seen what happens when you have a weak America. It turns out that the Pax Americana was a real thing and a good thing. Biden's intemperate and completely bungled withdrawal from Afghanistan signaled that America was at best a paper tiger. And of course, then you had the whole Ukraine war, which I know people have different opinions about this. I know that Putin is a bad guy. I've never been that scared of the former Soviet Union because it has so many internal problems, not the least of which is a severely declining population. And it is not a strong country, although Putin wisely projects a lot of strength. When it comes to Ukraine, what he always wanted was that eastern Ukrainian Donbass region, which gave him a warm water port, but which also had already been Russified for generations thanks to Stalin moving people in. And the Ukrainians had been very, very they had discriminated strongly against the Russian speakers in that area. What should always have happened was that Russia should have bought the territory from Ukraine, and that probably would have been the deal that Trump had brokered at the time. But Biden invited a war, and when it comes to Ukraine, things worked well as a buffer when it was a buffer state. Part of what triggered Putin's sudden aggression wasn't Russian expansionism. It was that Biden announced that he was behind Ukraine joining NATO. And Putin had always said, that's a red line, just as we've always said that there's certain things that can't come to our southern border because there are red lines where a nation protects itself. In Ukraine also, again, this is what the Biden administration and the Hunter pardon have exposed, was a completely corrupt repository of money laundering and, as we've seen, also child and sex trafficking. So I really had no love for Ukraine. I know the Ukrainians were more European-style people, and I know they're lovely, and it's a beautiful country. But for me, this was something where Biden triggered it, both because of the NATO proposal and because Ukraine was his money pit, and that really didn't concern America, and it would never have happened under Trump. So that it did happen, that it's dragged on, although Biden and his minions have used it to project strength and say they're fighting the big bad Russia. I've never bought into that. But most importantly, of course, is what happened last year. Hamas is an Iranian satellite Iran would probably never have acted if Trump had been in the White House. In fact, I know it wouldn't have acted because Trump was breaking it financially. And the moment he came into the White House, Biden instituted Obama's policy of funneling money back into Iran. Obama was all about Iran. He wanted Iran, not Saudi Arabia, to be the strong power in the Middle East. And so with Biden in the White House, then it was Iran that had the wind at its back. And that's why it felt comfortable using its proxy of Hamas to go after Israel, which Iran considers the big enemy in the Middle East, as do all Muslims. They are very hostile to the only pluralist, free, liberal, democratic society in the Middle East. So the expectation was that Israel, especially with pressure from Biden, would cave. I don't know that Hamas expected that its fighters would be so grotesque in their approach as to give the world a temporary shock. But the other thing that happened because of that, and this is again about the ascendant, well, two things. One, Israel fought back ferociously, and in a year of bloody war where Israel has made many sacrifices, on my Facebook page, I see the deaths on a regular basis, the tragedy of soldiers dying. But Israel destroyed Hamas, Israel destroyed Hezbollah, Israel destroyed the Houthis, Israel, when Iran tried to fire on it, destroyed Iran's air defense. Israel has completely destroyed Iran, which paved the way for the collapse of Syria, and Syria is new boss, same as the old boss, only worse, because Bashar al-Assad was a monster, but ISIS, Al-Qaeda are also monsters, and unlike Assad, they will kill all the Christians. So if people think there's a new era of liberty coming to Syria, they are seriously wrong. Syria is going to turn into a complete bloodbath, the likes of which we haven't seen in a long time, and Israel very, very wisely destroyed the entire Syrian military infrastructure in the last 24 hours that could have been used by this new ISIS power to attack Israel itself. So the Middle East is being reshaped in real time, and that is because of Biden's weakness. Not necessarily a bad thing. It would be a dreadful thing were Biden to continue in office, or were Kamala to continue in office come January. But I have a fair amount of faith that Trump will steer a course that will protect Israel and America, and that will protect those allies of Israel that need of America that need protecting in the Middle East. I'm thinking of Saudi Arabia. Now, I hold no brief for the Saudis at all. Having said that, the Crown Prince bin Salman is in his own way a reformer, and behind the scenes is not incredibly hostile to Israel, no more hostile than he has to be to maintain power. The UAE has abided by the Abraham Accords. Trump will expand on this as states kind of cluster together against the utter chaos that will be the bloodbath of Syria. And that banding together will also, I hope, weaken Turkey, where Erdogan is becoming a regional strongman. And Erdogan's a very, very bad person. He's the corn pop of Turkey. He's a bad dude, and it will be a good thing if Turkey turns out to be, God, I'm getting all my words mixed up. I'm sorry. I can see them all in my mind, but I'm a little dyslexic and they're all crowding in on me. But I see Syria, rather than being a good thing for Erdogan, he thinks that his side is winning. I see it being a tar baby for him. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the expression, it's from an old Southern story that got turned into the Uncle Remus stories that were then turned into the Song of the South movie that Disney made that was perceived as incredibly racist and is now banned. But the concept of a tar baby is that Brer Fox thought he was going to win a fight against a sort of inert object, and he didn't realize it was a figurine coated with tar, and the more he fought it, the more he became embroiled and sucked into it. For the Soviet Union, Afghanistan was a tar baby. For America, in part because the Soviet Union had corrupted America at home, Vietnam became a tar baby. And For Turkey, I'm hoping Syria becomes a tar baby. So Biden got us into this mess. I think that Trump can steer us between the Scylla and Charybdis and get us out of this mess and safely through and to a better chapter on the other side. But be that as it may, the world is now looking at 2 World War IIIs, one in Eastern Europe and one in the always volatile Middle East. And so there is a reason why the world's leaders are coming to make obeisance to Trump, to bow before him. In the case of Justin Trudeau, to accept meekly Trump's jokes about turning Canada in the 51st state. They are incredibly grateful that Trump is coming to power. We will not get all of the nasty cracks about Trump this time around. So Biden's presidency, by exposing the rot and by breaking things, helped Americans see that the Democrats are not moderates, that they are wild-eyed radicals who will destroy things, and helped the world see that the world is a safer, better place with a strong America, and that Trump is the one to deliver that America to the world. I just wanted to make a quick point about a very fundamental problem with Joe Biden's pardon of Hunter Biden and the proposal that he pardon all sorts of people who haven't yet been indicted or tried, although they might be indicted or tried, these preemptive pardons. He's also done what might be called temporal pardons. So Hunter Biden got a pardon for a 10-year period, even though the crimes for which he was tried and convicted occupied a very narrow slice of time. And in fact, he got a pardon for all of December, so he's free to do any federal crimes he wants during that time. And all these other people presumably would get temporal pardons for a period from 2016 to 2024 or whatever. Everybody intuitively understands that this is wrong, but I wanted to explain one of the points about why it's wrong. My son called me and was bothered by the very fact that a president would have this kind of pardon. This is, of course, a carryover from the King of England having a pardon. When our founders wrote the Constitution, they were doing so under the shadow of English law and their understandings of English justice and mercy. And the way they saw it is that you truly have to have something of last resort, something outside of and above the system that can say, even if process was followed, even if it looked like due process, even if the indictment was brought by a grand jury and the papers were correct and there was a trial and a verdict, when things are done according to form but are irredeemably corrupt at the government level, there has to be a way to interject mercy or to interject something that breaks into that corruption. So the point of the pardon is for the government to look at something the government itself has done wrong, that the federal judicial system has erred in some way, and they've done a bad indictment or a bad conviction that violates all sense of moral or practical decency. This is very different from what Biden is doing. Nothing corrupt has happened. There is nothing for him to correct using that narrow pardon power. Instead, he is like a pope of old doing an absolution, just simply erasing the sins. And even in the Middle Ages, this was seen as deeply wrong when people went around selling, give us a penny and all your sins will be absolved. That was one of the things that led to the Reformation, because people understood that this was not true justice or mercy. It was a commercial transaction. And in the case of Joe Biden, it is a transaction that is intended to protect Biden and his policies and to protect the government rather than protecting the people from the government. Sometimes you read something that is so smart, you just want to share it. This is what John Hinderaker of Powerline wrote about the difference between Trump's populist movement and left-wing populism. And I just thought it summed it up beautifully, so I'm just going to read it to you. And I got some commentary from someone who approves of that decision. In the present moment, there are two entirely distinct versions of populism. Pre-Ronald Reagan, conservative populism was viewed as a fringe phenomenon, if not an oxymoron. Reagan was the father of modern conservative populism. In the Trump era, conservative populism has grown as a political force. It generally refers to the effort, as manifested in the 24 election, to take political power back from the elites who have progressively seized it and return it to the people. To say that Trump and his fellow conservatives have criticized various institutions is a far cry from charging them with condoning the murder of leaders of those institutions. On the other hand, populism on the left has grown vastly more sinister since the days of, say, William Jennings Bryan. What passes for left-wing populism is now an incoherent blend of nihilism and socialism. It is fueled by hate, and it is appalling, but not surprising that in dark corners of the internet and social media, leftists are approving and even cheering on what they see as a politically motivated murder. Now, Hinderaker was obviously talking about the murder of the CEO of the healthcare company, but this is a much larger phenomenon of the leftists just wanting to burn down all the institutions. They no longer want to work within the institutions. They're definitely not constitutionalists who want to see power truly in the people, because power is in the people only when the government is small. These people are anarchists and death lovers and haters, and they're very, very scary, and they're part of why Trump won this last election. This is a fun idea I've actually been doodling around with since 2017, when I wrote 2 posts at my blog Bookworm Room about it, and it is the fact that Trump is America's Churchill. Now, I know that people looking at Trump's funny way of speaking versus Churchill's tremendous erudition might laugh at that, but actually the two men had a great deal in common. Both were half English, half American in parentage. Churchill had an American mother and a British father. Trump had a British mother and an American father. Both came from extremely wealthy backgrounds, but ended up politically despised by the class from which they came. Both of them were beloved among the common folk. Both started their political careers as liberals. Neither was a leftist. Both were liberals, and ended up as conservatives when they realized that their patriotism, and both truly loved their countries, that their patriotism was ill-served by their early political values. Both were and are completely fearless when it comes to politics. You could not shame Churchill, and you cannot shame Trump into yielding on things that they believe were and are important. It's hard to speak in the past and present tense at the same time. And there are 2 other things, and the first, I know people are going to laugh, but both are great communicators. Now, Churchill had spectacular turns of phrase. When he said after the Battle of Britain, "Now this is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning." And then, of course, his famous, "We will fight them on the beaches. We will fight them in the towns. We will never surrender." I mean, that is oratory of the highest form. He also had a tremendous ability to distill ideas. So he said, "Socialism is a philosophy of failure, the creed of ignorance, and the gospel of envy. Its inherent virtue is the equal sharing of misery." Trump is incapable of speaking in those terms. When he gives a decent speech, it's because someone wrote it. But Trump is also an extraordinary communicator, and again, not with the elegance, say, of Ronald Reagan, but he creates pictures in people's minds, and it's those pictures that power him and his policies. We're going to build a wall. That is a concrete image about how Trump is going to save America's sovereignty. They're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats. Simplistic language. So he didn't have to go into a whole narrative about the problems that immigrants, both illegal and those who ought not to be here, although the Biden government is breaking the rules to welcome them in. Those word pictures are overwhelming, saying things are huge. It's big pictures. China. The way he says it tells people that China is a problem. Calling Liz Warren Pocahontas. The more sophisticated way was Pocahontas, but Trump understood that the wordplay doesn't work. Pocahontas pokes holes in Liz Warren's fake identity. And then both men, Churchill and Trump, had extraordinary physical courage. And this goes back to famous words. Churchill, who served in the Boer War in South Africa, said and meant, nothing in life is so exhilarating as to be shot at without result. And in Butler, Pennsylvania, when Donald Trump was shot at with result, when he was gushing blood, although he didn't know how badly he was wounded, stood up, pumped his fist in the air and said, fight, fight, fight. And finally, both of them have come when their countries needed them the most. And so, I don't know. I just think there is a lot that those two men have in common. And I've always been a great admirer of Churchill, and he was certainly imperfect. And Trump is certainly imperfect. I do not worship politicians, but I do recognize when we have the right man at the right time. And I do recognize the extraordinary qualities of these two political colossi. Thanks so much for sticking around to the end of this podcast. I will try to do another one soon, although with the holiday season coming up, I can't make any guarantees. In that spirit, since I don't know what I'll be doing between now and Christmas and Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and if I'm not back until January, Happy New Year. I am incredibly optimistic about the coming year, and that's despite the turmoil in the world. For someone like Trump, who functions well in chaos, this turmoil may be the perfect thing for him to clear the way for a new American, well, maybe not an American century, but certainly an American decade, and a great time for the world as a whole.